Oh, he was the prime minister. If you read the rest of it, you'll get all that. But I think it's a damn important document, and I still haven't found out from Barbara Honecker why it got deleted from the book.
Paul,
it's not in the book.
Paul, you were never able to get in touch with that guy that did the consolidated thing, were you? Really? Huh.
One conversation anyone will do. Who wants to be the next conversation? Go ahead.
I don't know if people saw The Nation.
You thought I was joking.
Yeah, I'm sorry. In The Nation, Alexander Coburn has this wonderful thing about the nature of the gay series being like Alcoholics Anonymous. And my name is Bob G, and I'm a pathological liar.
Hey, listen, if you're going to have the head of the world's biggest spy operation, which is dedicated to lying for a living, now wouldn't you want the best liar you could find? You know, I mean, isn't that, I mean, do you want a guy who gets up there and can't tell a lie to head an institution that is dedicated to lying? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to have a person who tells the truth running the CIA, does it?
Yes, no.
Well, therefore, in fact, maybe Gates is the ideal candidate precisely because he can't tell the truth. You know, I mean, pathological liar may be the most appropriate person to head a pathological institution.
As the head of the CIA, and then Gates in the Supreme Court.
That's exactly what Coburn suggests.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah, he starts off saying that he nominates Clarence Thomas for Director of Central Intelligence and Robert Gates on the Supreme Court.
Alexander Coburn, oh, you got preempted. you thought of it first.
I thought that would be funny. I like that idea.
Hey, listen, at this point, if you want my honest opinion, I really believe that the system is now absolutely in a crash and burn mode. It's got the glide angle of a brick. Now, the thing is, the only important question is, how far above the ground is it? It's, you know, we're not, I mean, it's not, you don't have to have a big mountain or anything for it to fly into. It's going to fly into the earth. The question is, well, but the fact is that we are now looking at a very serious prospect of a deregulation of banking and the abrogation of the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933, which is going to do for the banks exactly what was done for the S&Ls. Now, if we have a complete banking explosion or implosion, then in fact we are looking at the fundamental destruction of the entire economic system. Now, given that that is sort of a high likelihood event, the thing that I think is going to be interesting is what's going to come out of it. And the thing that bothers me at this point is the best I can see coming out of it is fundamentally a two-tier operation. I think what we're being put through right now is a strategy of tension, which was developed by the fascisti after World War II to manipulate Italy and other governments in what is laughingly known as the Western democratic system. And I think that we are now being put through the same kind of strategy of tension that has been used in other countries. I mean, if you want to look at how that was done, you know, go back and study Chile before the coup in '73. The same thing was done in Argentina before the generals took over. And the same thing was done in Greece before the Greek colonels took over. And I think we're seeing the same fundamental game plan being run here in the United States. There's been a massive increase in poverty in this country. There's also been a massive decline in the income structure for 80% of the population. Even if you aren't living under a bridge, you are not now living in terms of real purchasing power as well as you were a decade ago. And in fact, we are now getting all sorts of people saying this is the first generation that is already scheduled to live at a level below that of their parents. And there, in fact, is now something like 30% of adult children are moving home with mom and dad because they have been laid off in New York or DC or whatever. There are reports that people are now going to McDonald's with resumes as stockbrokers, CPAs, so on and so forth, looking for a job as a manager at the Fallen Arches. And I mean, these are really important factors in terms of what's going on in the total society. If, in fact, this is a planned, calculated, and intentional program to drive people into the situation where they're fundamentally going to be fighting each other over simple survival, then what you're doing is you're creating a situation in which basic anarchy is the first consequence of this program. Well, how do you get people to want the tanks in North Portland? Well, you have enough crack houses, enough drive-by shootings, and I am still at this point convinced that some of those drive-by shootings are done by people who usually pack a badge. A badge. I think that, in fact, a lot of the violence in this country is, in fact, done by government agents. You take somebody like Purdy, who went from up here in Oregon down to Stockton with an AK-47. How many people do you know that would engrave Hezbollah on the stock of their AK-47 before shooting Asian kids in a schoolyard in Stockton who are not, in fact, out of central casting?
Say again.
Oh, I can tell you how to do my music.
How many was it?
Just three.
No, just three.
Is there some innuendo to Hezbollah, or is that just...
No, the fact is that when that happened, what was the name that was the 3-minute hate out of the White House? Hezbollah, right? Everybody was going, oh, you know, the boogeyman has been reinvented, right? And here it is, carved on the stock of the AK-47, that this, I think, Manchurian candidate, who was wired up by the government, is using to, you know, spray a school ground full of little kids. Now, there's hardly anything that causes more instant and automatic outrage than the gratuitous slaughter of children, right? I mean, what is going to cause you the biggest heartburn is, you know, killing kids,
Except
right?
it's a reversal on Vietnam because they're using Soviet weapons instead of M16s.
Yeah, and if he'd been using an M16, in fact, he would have, he hit, I think it was 36, 12 died. You could have taken and turned it over, because there would have been 36 dead out of the total.
Well, you've considered
An
M16.
An M16 compared to an AK-47, if I got to get shot with one or the other, I'll take an AK any day.
Really, why?
For a very simple reason. It conforms to the laws of land warfare, because it's not, in fact, designed to kill. It's designed to punch a hole. An M16 disintegrates, tumbles, and in fact, you get shot in the arm with an AK, it'll maybe break the bone. An M16 will tear your arm off.
The velocity is much faster. Well, it does.
Well, it's 3,400 feet per second out the muzzle. It's only a .223 diameter cartridge, and it's nominally 55 grains. But see, that's the whole reason they invented that weapon, was to kill. And technically, it conforms to the technical requirements. And the requirement is that the weapon not be designed to produce unnecessary death and suffering.
Blade of grass or a drop of rain.
Oh, it'll disintegrate on a leaf. And the fact is, it was designed to quote unquote comply with laws by evading them.
What about East St. Louis as a prototype for this North Portland scenario you're talking about? How about that?
Oh,
Complete
well,
municipal breakdown.
absolute, complete.
Essentially, you have a kind of a prison camp scenario going on there. Kind of an urban prison camp, self-imposed partially.
Are you aware? I was just going to get to that.
East St. Louis is an entire fucking city there that has this happening.
Well, you-hoo, one at a time. Go ahead.
I was just all over East LA and in Chicago as well now, in most of the barrios. Most
There
of the
are
projects.
no-go areas.
There are no-go areas.
Just
Even in
like
the areas
Northern
where
Ireland.
You can go with an ID card proving you're from that neighborhood. You got to show your ID at the door of your project, pass a metal detector to get in.
Now,
Oh, now what's going on with municipal breakdown? I mean, city.
The whole city
was.
is essentially broken down. They haven't had garbage collected for a couple of years. People are just burning their garbage, throwing it in the streets. They've got essentially no municipal systems. The city is way bankrupt. And New York City is about bankrupt for that matter.
well, but again,
That's a fucked up city,
but
40,000 people live there. The population has decreased from 120,000, I think, from like 5-10 years ago, something like that.
well, but again, you know, when you hear a symphony, I mean, when you go to the movie and and you hear a symphony, it usually occurs to you that there is an orchestra, right? You know, and there's a conductor, you know, and there's a composer. Now, when you see an entire society being systematically deindustrialized, for instance, right now, the company that I'm doing the work for, do you know where we buy our CO2 cartridges? Japan. Now, who invented the CO2 cartridge? The United States. You know, most of the technology that was invented here by Russians, Germans. Got to remember, the brain drain to the United States is why, in fact, we had a hammerlock on patents for 30 years. Well, now, in fact, the United States is no longer the leading country for new patents. We are, in fact, number 3.
Who's 1 and 2?
Guess who? Japan and Germany. Now, that's no accident. Any more than it's an accident that, for instance, right now they've got a whole new generation of flat screen projection systems that, you know, you can now have, you know, color graphics on a screen that's about a 1/4 inch thick for a laptop computer. It was invented by a company down in Silicon Valley, and in fact it's going to be manufactured in Japan because there is no money in the United States to develop it here. Now, the reason there's no money is because, in fact, you know, we used to snicker about a capital flight to the U.S. Well, now we have a capital flight out of the U.S., and we're going to not only be deindustrialized, we're going to be decapitalized. And we might as well be chickens in the barnyard debating whether, you know, farm policy because our opinion doesn't count. They're going to do it whether we like it or not. I was over at a friend's shop this afternoon and I saw what I consider the absolute classic paradigm. They have a cat in the shop, you know, a nice, you know, cat, and it had found a mouse. And it had, in fact, kept that mouse around now for 2 days to play with. And I got a couple of pictures of the cat, and it's sitting there, you know, up on a pallet, you know, next to an engine. And it's looking at the mouse, which is out in the middle of the floor, and the mouse has been battered, you know, for 2 days. Not killed, just battered, you know. And so the cat is sitting there watching the mouse, you know, and the mouse is out in the concrete floor going, I don't like this at all. Now, I would really like to escape, but if I move, it's going to get me. So it's, you know, trying to figure out, well, is the cat going to go to sleep and I can, you know, make a shot for under the pallet? You know, and it was the paradigm, and I looked at that and I said, let's see, there was the demonstration against the twisted shrub. Let's see, the police and the demonstrators. And I had this image of the cat and the mouse, you know. And I'm thinking that it applies to more than just the demonstration. It also applies to us living in this society where we, you know, every morning get up and I pledge allegiance to the Mafia of America, you know, and to the twisted shrub for which it stands, you know, with liberty, justice, and a bridge you can live under for everybody. I mean, how can you not be nuttier than a fruitcake growing up in a society where you lie every morning? Compulsory deceit. With liberty and justice for whom?
You also get busted for living under the bridge.
Well, of course! You don't know in New York they've evicted the homeless?
Hey, they're doing it in Portland.
If the bridge stays up.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Pictures when Bush came to town last time, man, kicking out homeless. Cops with shotguns walking down under the convention center, under the freeway there, kicking out homeless with shotguns.
Well, you don't want to argue with a shotgun.
No, I wouldn't.
No, I really recommend against it. Although, actually, the cops are not real bright. They use double-aught buck. If it hadn't been for the cops using double-aught buck, Huey P. Newton would have been dead. No, not Huey. Eldridge Cleaver would have been dead years before.
Why? Because he only got a couple of guns?
No, you get a couple of, you know, double-aught buck's 33 caliber. You don't catch a couple of those and, you know, walk around bragging about it. Because basically it's like getting two 30-30 rounds. The thing is that the group that even a cylinder bore Riot 12 shoots, you know, from here, you know, to the far wall, it would cover no more than an 8.5 by 11. Wouldn't even cover that. It'd be half that. You know, you're talking about a group about this big around at 30 feet. Well, what the hell? Why not use a rifle? You know, you're not going to, you know, do any worse or any better. The reason for a riot gun is because, in fact, you got spread. Well, when Eldridge Cleaver went over the fence in West Oakland, which until they turned it into condos, you could still go years later and see the buckshot holes and everything. It was sort of a local, you know, if you...
the tour bus by, did they?
Well, it was kind of a tour for the initiates. Most people didn't know where it happened, didn't know what happened, and didn't really care. But anyway, so I went back and looked at some of these, you know, historic sites. And if they'd have been used number 4 buck, he would have never become famous, nor would he be now working for Reverend Sun Young Moon. I mean, he has come a long way. The interesting thing about Eldridge Cleaver is that, in fact, he has never changed his entire career. He's been an opportunist since day one. And in fact, he has simply seen different directions for opportunity, and he's taken them. He's what I call, at one time, a progressive opportunist. Now I consider him a reactionary opportunist, but he's in good company. Remember that a lot of people who used to work for Ramparts are now writing for Soldier of Fortune. Remember Collier and Horowitz? You know, Horowitz wrote a wonderful book in 1968 about the American Empire. His latest publication was in Soldier of Fortune, denouncing the New Left, the prison movement, and all of the people who had, you know, taken part in all those things in the 60s and the 70s. But he's, you know, he's in good standing. I mean, there's a whole generation that came out of the 30s that did the same thing. Where do you think we got the neoconservatives of today, like Jean Kirkpatrick? At one time, she was a left-wing Democrat. Now she's, you know, basically Godzilla in drag. I mean, she's the one that Bud McFarlane said he didn't dare go soft on the Sandinista, or she would make him look like a wimp. You know, I mean, you got to live through all this stuff to begin to appreciate just how bizarre it is. I mean, I keep thinking that I've stumbled into some play that was written by a combination of Franz Kafka and Monty Python. You know, sort of a Hieronymus Bosch painting that came to life. I mean, it's that bizarre. I mean, if in fact we had not grown up in this and it had not been foisted off on us an inch at a time, you know, we would have never bought the whole 9 yards. If in fact they were doing now, if they had started at bang, you know, square one, you know, 19 whatever, you know, say 10 years ago, there would have been massive rioting in the streets. But what they do is they do it to you a little bit at a time, so you never have a real line that you feel like it got crossed, because what they do is they sneak it up on you. And if you never ever can establish a line beyond which, you know, the garbage has got to stop, then in fact the garbage never does stop, because they just keep moving you along and moving the line along and you never notice.
Yeah, so,
Until it's too damn late.
So okay, so people can't sleep under a bridge. What do you think people should do to, you know, like right here, right now in Portland, to, you know, do something about that?
Oh, what do I think we should do? Well, I mean, are we talking practical or hypothetical? Hypothetical, I mean, you know, the sky's the limit. Practical, I don't know. I suppose in a certain sense we're sort of in a position of the IRA a decade ago, and I think a lot of people are going to have to do some real serious, you know, almost like fast unto death, as Bobby Sand did. I mean, I think it's going to take something that's going to really jerk people around.
Sand's a really specific thing to bitch about. We've got like this, you know, amorphous, we're screwing the environment, we're building bombs and bullets and spending billions of dollars, and there's no health care or education.
It's an emergency to aid the Kuwaitis, but it's not an emergency to extend unemployment benefits for people that have been unemployed here.
What do we do now? What do we do? What do you call people here that are gathered listening to you? What do you call them to do tomorrow, next week, next month?
Well,
what do you think they should do?
Specifically, what I call people to do is to think about what is in fact happening. Let me finish. I mean, if you're going to hit me with this kind of question, you're going to have to let me finish the answer before you jump on it. All right. Fundamentally, it seems to me that part of the problem we have today is ignorance of what in the hell has been done in the past. And I think people have to understand what has been tried, what has worked, what hasn't, so that they have some guidance now, because reinventing the wheel is not necessarily a useful operation. Then, basically, you have to set what are realistic objectives in terms of the forces available to achieve them. Now, if you decide, you know, that there is a certain amount of energy, force, and organization you have, then you have to connect that to what you're trying to achieve in a realistic way, so that in fact you can get from here to there, because calling the grass green is a great hobby, you know, left of the Chamber of Commerce. But it doesn't change anything, and your point is well taken. But I personally do not, in fact, recommend to anybody that they do anything, because, in fact, if I did, I would end up with the wonderful cuffs about here, because there are laws against what I would recommend.
No, there are laws.
Therefore, I say to you, now let me pose it back to you, since I don't know you from a fence post, that you follow your conscience. And you do what you think is right. You do what you think will work, and I wish you the best. But don't expect me to get up here and put myself in prison.
Okay, I also don't know you from a fence post.
That's fair.
Theoretically, you
but
should
I
be
am
able
sitting here on camera. And there are laws about advocacy, inciting, etc. I know the laws. Well, I know burning a flag is a protected First Amendment right. But
it's arson.
There's something I'd say about that. Z Magazine is starting a new project called Z Papers. and Z papers, and they're not rolling papers. And the Z papers, the intention is to come up with ideas of what people can do.
Proposals for practical
change.
Right.
And it's going to start next year, and it's going to be $15 a year subscription, and it sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
At least they're
Okay,
trying to
I'll go
address
for that.
Is that different than Z Magazine?
Yeah, it's a new project that just started.
Going along with what you
All right.
going along with what you just said, if you can't figure it out from what's all happening, what's all being talked about, you're not going to do it anyway. You can't figure it out on your, I mean, from talking with other people, you know, and talking about what's going on and figuring it out, if you can't figure it out, you're probably not going to have the impotence unless somebody else tells you to do something to do it anyway. And you probably shouldn't do something like that if somebody else is telling you to do it.
Well, that you're raising a real good point, because in fact, I guess I'm a devotee of the life of Brian. You remember, did everybody here know the film by Monty Python, the Life of Brian? Well, well, a lot of people decided that Brian was the Messiah, you know, and he didn't want to be the Messiah. He just wanted this chick. See, that's why he was in the Messiah business, was to you know, get this wonderful young lady in the sack. But in the process, everybody decided he really was the Messiah, so they were all following him, and he wanted them to go away, and they wouldn't. So anyway, so it ends up, you know, one morning he opens the shutter, steps out on the balcony, nude, and here is 1,000 disciples in the street. Master, master, master. And he goes, oh dear, you know, jumps back in, grabs his robe, runs back out and says, oh God, what do I tell these people? He says, it's very important, you must listen to me. It is absolutely important, you've got to think for yourselves. And everybody in the street goes, we must think for ourselves. And he goes, oh, it's hopeless. You know, now let's cut to the chase. I am not the Messiah, I'm not the guru, and I'm not going to tell anybody what to do.
Wait a minute. If you're paranoid about what you do on screen, you don't do, oh, but we should do the IRA. You know, so your bottom line doesn't match with the first things that came out of your mouth.
I'm not going to take the hook. Period. Is that clear? Because it is fun.
That's a fence post. Now I know it's a fence post.
That's right. I've been in this game for 25 years, okay?
You want to take the camera and tell us what we should do?
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah. Let's make you God.
Well, I'm with him. He did do a bottom line. I don't know. It's up to all of us. But, goddamn, there are lots of things. This is one of the things happening here. And there's a lot of things happening in this town. It's a beautiful town. There's Matrix. There's the Vet's Peace Place. There's this
Cosmine.
Like we said, it's a beautiful town.
It's a wonderful town. But we've also got to try for, you know, we've got to draw people to mixing tactics.
Careful, that's how Ramsey blew an ad.
We can't do the IRA, but we can mix lobbying with direct action. Shh. We can mix lobbying with direct action protest. We can organize people to do nonviolent civil disobedience. And I'd like to see energies like this, or all sorts of places, directed towards that. And somehow, you know, it's like, my line is fewer rocks, more arrests.
More handcuffs? More handcuffs?
You've got Cosmime out there that's going, oh God, we can't do civil disobedience because, well, it's illegal and it's violence, you know? But it's not. As long as you don't provide people with an opportunity to express themselves in a really, you know, powerful form. This is one of those powerful forms.
There's something out there. Civil disobedience is in the apparatus equation. It's already in your equation.
When this city had 15,000 people out there in what do they call it? Pioneer Square. We could have had 2,000 people getting arrested. That's not in their equation. 106 people, 106.
That is blank, and they can do what they.
You're wrong. 106.
They can come in their buses from the city.
Buses ready to arrest every damn one of us.
I don't know how long y'all have been in this town, but 106 people blocking, getting arrested. You know, there's like 800 stories. 106 people in Van.
You respect the circle.
Yeah.
You know, it's time you stop dominating groups. Really, I know you. He's here for a reason, and we're here for a reason. You've had your time. Somebody else can talk now.
That's responsive.
We could all go limp in front of him, and either way, he'd prove himself wrong.
I'm interested in what he has to say. I've not heard him.
You know, this is a legitimate issue. What in the hell can you really do when you're playing against a rigged wheel? But of course, the other point is, why do you play against a rigged wheel? Well, because it's the only wheel in town, right? Well, I can tell you one little secret. You're never, ever going to beat a rigged wheel. Not if you play by its rules. Now, you got to think about that. And let me tell you another little secret. And that is, if you think there's any limit to how many people they can put in jail for the sitting down in a freeway, I can advise you that your historical knowledge is somewhere between slim and none.
But the white train no longer goes through the Portland-Vancouver area because a mere 106 people blocked it in Vancouver, and the Vancouver Police Department, City Attorney's Office said, we're not going to fund that anymore. No, it's a teeny-weeny,
The white train still moves. It's not stopped, they just rerouted
The
it.
mail still moves on Monday, and everybody goes back to their jobs. Everybody pays their goddamn taxes. You haven't won a revolution.
That's right.
So what are we going to do about that tomorrow and next week? Are we going to talk about it, or are we going to do something? And I think...
How do you get what you Yeah, let's talk about it.
Or what are you doing about talking?
Okay, on Thanksgiving Day, we'll be doing some protest campouts on multi-issue issues.
Who's we?
Who is we? You just didn't vote, I mean, you have a mouse in your pocket?
What, you want an organizational plan?
Yeah,
Seriously, you said we are going to do X, Y, Z. Now who's we?
What's going to be happening?
New clear vision.
New clear vision.
Maybe you remember the homeless protest campouts that happened a year or so ago in front of River Place. We were there for 3 months, and they eventually arrested us, but we were there for 3 months, and we were also camping out in front of City Hall, and it was all just homeless issues, and I'm sorry that some people are bummed about how much I'm dominating the conversation. This time we want it to be really multi-issue, not just peace, not just justice, but environment and...
Well, there are lots of issues.
I hazard a guess that you bring in multi-issues somewhere in the melee, you're going to bring up an issue called capitalism and how it's fucking the society out of its wealth. That's where it's really at.
Can we advocate?
Try getting Portland
Can you advocate
pulled together for a general strike.
Can we advocate? Can we advocate?
I know general strike doesn't work over corporal punishment.
Yoo-hoo! Whoop! Time out! Break!
Diversion.
Break. Okay. Let's get it back on a single track here.
Thank you.
Right as you get work. Who was that? I don't know who the hell that was. It was? The Fabled?
Who?
Jeff Litico?
Who's that?
A guy who is obviously
He's unclear.
dedicated to the proposition that he should be monarch.
Of course not you.
But, you know, you never walk into another monarch's court, you know, and try to take over.
That's stupid.
Unless you're, you know, playing with a few sandwiches short of a full picnic basket.
Of course you got the wheel rigged.
With cigarettes and coffee.
You know, But you don't do what he just did, which is try to set me up for 10 years in federal penitentiary. Now, if he didn't know what he's doing, he's thicker than whale shit. And if he did know what he's doing, I don't need to talk to him again. You know, I was quite serious with him. I mean, there were a lot of people went to prison for inciting to riot, for conspiracy.
There's some right
We
now.
have a case right now against
Right now.
Metzger. They're proving it on the rack. They can prove it elsewhere.
No, the funny thing is that's
Funny
what...
how that is.
Well, Metzger said, I heard him on an interview, which was extremely hostile, and I mean, Metzger is basically a low life form, you know, who is not necessarily, well, let me put it this way, I mean, I would class him on about the same level as a lawyer. Not a species that I really want to put, you know, at a high premium.
We expect
But-
a TV repairman.
But it is a good sample case for the
But what he said, when he said it, I said, this man is, you know, not all wrong. He said, what you let them do to me, they're going to do to you. And then what's really ironic is, you know, these wonderful new pain holes. I mean, the cops have been taking taekwondo and other, and you know, they're probably, you know, getting some little tips from the acupuncturists, you know, on how to inflict pain without it being grotesque for the tube. Now that our fearless flying focus team has in fact gotten the chief of the Blue Terror Squad to say, oh, it's okay to videotape arrests. So now they can in fact inflict great pain on you without it being something that will be noticed on camera. And they practice that on the Fruit Loops at the abortion clinics. And I did in fact find it very difficult to say, shame on you for you know, being mean to these you know, let's face it, they were aborted between the ears sometime after birth because there is nothing in there. I mean, it's just, you know, they're ambulatory organ donors, which incidentally I classed. Vera Katz is my candidate for ambulatory organ donor of the year.
The dog agrees.
The reason is that you can prove by extrapolation that the population of our species will exceed the mass of the planet Earth in the year 3060, I believe it is. And the proposition that the mass of the human family will exceed the mass of the planet, I find difficult to cope with. I mean, that's like saying that a tapeworm is going to exceed the mass of the host, and I say, no, it won't. It can't. It's a case where eventually reality has to, you know, reassert itself, and therefore the proposition advanced in various, you know, religious or quasi-religious or mystical or folklore or just plain ambulatory brain death, you know, from centuries ago, that be fruitful and multiply, because eventually you'll end up with what was the recommendation for solving the Irish food problem, you know, in 18... Yeah, well, we're going to use the babies as substitute for potatoes, I believe was the modest proposal. You know, and I mean, you've got to take the little compartments in your head, bring down the walls, and get them to talk to each other. You know, because even the people who say abortion is worse than Adolf Hitler, because more unborn, well, the next thing you know, we're going to be protecting the unconceived.
Yeah.
Do you realize that masturbation is murder?
100,000 sperm!
Right! Every egg that doesn't need a sperm Eggicides, spermicides. We already have spermicides. Well, but the thing is, there aren't enough eggs per month to meet the number of sperm. Now there's an imbalance. See? Now you can take the, civil rights for the unconceived.
Well, you could have the less well-endowed sperm carrying the possessions of the well-endowed sperm that's going to actually make it to the egg.
What?
I don't think I follow that, but I mean the point is we've got to have a return to a level of verbal and scientific sanity. How many people here have ever heard of unborn children? Everybody's heard of unborn children. Let me ask, why don't we have unborn adults? Unborn senior citizens.
They're cats.
Well, how about unborn? Look,
Since they really haven't determined when life begins, aren't we all candidates for abortion?
As a matter of fact, no, we haven't. Hold on. No, seriously, that's a really important issue. We have established when life began. It was 3 billion years ago, and it happens once per planet. That's when life began. Now, if you're talking about when does a particular life begin, in many cases, as far as I can determine, never, because there's no evidence of brain function throughout life. It's like a frog. I remember once I was down in Texas and we got off swing shift and 2 guys had motorcycles and there was a big rain and there was this loading dock ramp that was just full of water and frogs. Well, it was spring and they were in a state of absolute lust.
The frogs.
And here we were with 2 big Japanese motorcycles with the high beams on these fucking frogs.
Literally.
Who were totally ignoring us. Like we weren't even there. We could have been immobile, fence posts for all they were concerned. They didn't care. Here are 2 big Japanese 400, or 4,000 cc motorcycles with their engines roaring and the lights shining on them, and the frogs are ignoring everything. I am amazed at how they replicate the human family. When lust is up, everything else is irrelevant. Okay, fine. But there is a little thing called the food chain that takes care of a surplus of frogs. Now, what is the food chain to take care of a surplus of people? The people.
The government.
The government, right. Well, what we do is we set this up, on A, B, C, D, E, and it was D, all the above. In any event, the thing is that we're going to have to grow up as a civilization. We're going to have to grow up as a society. We're going to have to grow up as individuals, or we're going to pay the consequences. And if you know anything about how people tend to function under stress, you know that the old joke about there are no atheists in the foxhole, well, there are no adults either, because in fact they'd be better off wearing diapers. I'm waiting for the penny to drop. Why is it somebody who's never been in the service, never been in a foxhole, is the one that picks it up and the rest of the city are glazed? In any event, no, the fact is people tend to shit their drawers in the foxhole when the bullets are going by because it's scary. Real scary. And it's real. And if you have a real bullet going by and you say to yourself, let's see, 6 inches to the left and I am bye-bye, it gets your attention. At a level that most other things lack. And the fact is that there is an instant regression to infantilism. You start saying, Mother, I should have prayed more. And you regress emotionally. And that's what's happening in the society today. We are regressing to a level of infantilism where we can be manipulated, controlled, directed, compelled. And in fact, this is not accidental. It goes clear back into the 60s with the material that came out of the Selective Service over the signature of General Hershey, which was titled Channeling. He said that the difference between a free society and a totalitarian society is the difference between permitting people choices or simply ordering them. What we have discovered is that we get much better results from giving people choices. However, what we do is we give them the choices they get to make. And we structure the environment in such a way that we can predict what percentage will choose door A versus door B versus door C versus door E. And we put them in this room. And we raise the temperature until it's so uncomfortable they have to exit. And they will go through A, B, C, or D. And we know, roughly speaking, what percentage will do which. You have now this whole legion of chicken hawks in Washington who took student deferment from the Vietnam War. And in the process were properly trained to be the house mouths for the ruling elite. People like Elliott Abrams, the man who was so delighted to kill people in Nicaragua with the Contras, couldn't make it to the war. Nor did Dick Cheney, the Secretary of War, and General Mayhem. He took out also. And, you know, the paragon of military virtue, Sylvester Stallone, spent the Vietnam War teaching PE at a girls' finishing school in Switzerland.
What cabinet post did he have?
Pardon?
What cabinet post did he have?
Well, his cabinet post is the chief of propaganda for the post-Vietnam era. We are now all over the Vietnam syndrome, which was a momentary lapse in infantilism where somebody said, wait a minute, why in the hell am I going to kill people I never even met for people who don't give a rat's backside about my survival? Why am I doing that? I mean, that is so fundamentally dumb that anybody who would do it is probably a candidate for a rubber room.
But the Gulf War put that delusion behind us.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
We're so over it now. We haven't felt this good about ourselves since World War II.
It's an initiation for the corporate environment.
You want to play with us?
The corporate environment
You gotta go.
I think it's neo-feudalism. Because, in fact, people are going to be so absolutely tied to place that they're going to be in a position that is going to be one step removed from chattel slavery.
And you remember all those space movies in the 70s, like Star Wars and stuff, where here they were advanced in outer space and stuff, and they still had princesses and dukes and all that shit.
Ain't that weird? That's like there was no learning curve. You know something? There isn't. You look at history, and it's always been one bunch of damn mobsters going out and snookering the Meadow Muffins into going out and risking their backside to make the mobster rich. And it don't make no, I mean, most people really don't know much about history because if they did, they'd stop making the same mistakes over and over. Which is why I get so absolutely adamant about learn your history. How many people here have ever read W.E.B. Du Bois' book, John Brown? This is a very literate group. This is a very literate group. I mean, it's outstanding. What's everybody else's excuse? How many people here have never heard of the book? Come on, fess up.
I've heard of it.
Well, yeah, from me. Oh, okay. You're exonerated. No, but it. All right. Now, why do I think that's an important book? Well, I think it's important because if you read the book, you don't just get, oh, well, John Brown, he was the guy who raided Harper's Ferry, you know, and got hanged. End of subject. You get the whole historical context of the abolitionist movement that involved people all over the country. It involved, you know, the Underground Railroad, which in fact ran again in the 60s and the 70s. We had an Underground Railroad that ran people out of the United States to Canada and to Europe, and at least 250,000 went to Canada alone. Altogether, we had a vast number of people who left this country in the 60s and the 70s in opposition to the war. Well, but understanding the prior history of the abolitionist movement is important precisely because it raises many of the same issues we're facing today. There was a split between the pacifists who said that the means of achieving abolition are secondary, you know, to the objective, i.e., if we use violence to achieve the objective, then the objective, in fact, is compromised. There were people who said that the objective, in fact, is primary and the means of achievement are secondary. Well, now that division is historic. It also existed, if you go back to the next prior big happening, the American Revolution, which was like Nicaragua. Everybody can understand in Nicaragua how there was a unification of people who ultimately became enemies after the revolution because they had a common enemy. Well, I mean, why do we think we're different? There was a solidification of forces that were both reactionary and radical against George III and the British government. And after the success of independence, they split apart. And
landowners took over.
Well, it wasn't just landowners. It was, in fact, the ruling elite of its day. If you get in Federalist number 10, next to the last paragraph, you'll discover, lo and behold, that government is designed to prevent the equal distribution of property or other such wicked and pernicious schemes. I bet you didn't know that's what it was all about.
You know, Ace,
Yeah.
that is in my literature book.
Good.
No, I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
It's getting out.
Well, Federalist number 10, however, is written in code. What the hell was a faction? A faction was anybody who opposed. A faction was anybody who opposed the elite. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, we went through the whole code with busing. You know, I mean, every generation produces its own code words so that you can talk about things that you can't talk about. Well, the elite simply established a system of code words, you know, and the Federalists were, in fact, the Anti-Federalists, and the Anti-Federalists were, in fact, the Federalists. That got things off to a real rousing confusion at the get-go.
What it was?
The Federalists
Oh, I see what you're saying. I get it. Right.
were the Anti-Federalists
Right.
because they, in fact, were opposing the federal system that existed under the Articles of Confederation. And the Anti-Federalists, the radicals, the egalitarians, the people who believed in the principles of the Declaration of Independence, were, in fact, tarred as Anti-Federalists, which, of course, since federal was the buzzword of its day, I mean, why are there 927,000 different front groups all using the word democracy? Because it's a buzzword. Buzz, 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 you know, and brain function stops and you go, oh, you know, like the train seal, you know. Well, there's the National Endowment for Democracy, right? What does the National Endowment for Democracy do?
Overthrows democratic
They
government.
kill people.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you call the death squad the, you know, the Democratic Re-Education Campaign.
Or freedom fighters.
Freedom fighters.
Well, yeah, but that isn't as good as Democratic Re-Education Campaign. You know, I had to be working for them coming up with BS. Yeah, but the point I'm getting at is you got to get past the rhetoric and the words, whether they buzz or not, you know, and figure out who's really doing what to whom and why. And you know, there's always the things that are important that are beyond the rhetoric, and that is, what the hell are the effects? You know, if you look at the effects of a policy, you can judge the purpose of the policy, because I am always, you know, in a position where I say, well, they did it because that's what they wanted. I don't say, oh, well, they're thicker than the excreta of the great Leviathan and just didn't know what they were doing.
You know, people I argue with who argue that Bush has no domestic policy.
Certainly he does. It's called genocide.
Right.
Just like his foreign policy.
But people,
He
you
has
don't know
a
how many
unified
people
policy.
You don't know how many people say he has no domestic policy.
Well,
He's
that's
also-
safer than facing reality. Now, look, if your mother were, you know, a low-class hooker, would you not want to prefer to say she's a sex therapist? It's an emotional issue. It's not intellectual. You know, it's not informational. It's not evidentiary. It's emotional. You can't say the truth when, in fact, it's too emotionally traumatic. And to say that George Bush is a homicidal maniac, a pathological liar, and a person who makes Adolf Hitler look like a pussycat, if you say that, that causes a little thing called cognitive dissonance. It's an emotional trauma, and you can't deal with it, so you just avoid it.
Did anybody watch the other evening the program on health programs in this country, like an emergency, the state of emergency hospitals throughout this country?
Well, we have a lower level of childhood immunization than El Salvador, for Christ's sake.
Point out to individuals that think we do have a domestic policy, just how
We do have a domestic policy. That is part of the policy.
Just how bad things really are. I mean, that program really pointed out that these emergency hospital rooms that we think take care of people and how severe they are in some of the parts of this country.
In fact, what is really happening in terms of, I mean, you do go in for a wallet biopsy as the first medical procedure, but the fact is that people are being turned away from emergency rooms. And what happens is their system, you know, deteriorates, the condition advances, and by the time they actually do get medical attention, the amount of damage that's been done in many cases is, you know, permanent rather than temporary. Their entire life is at risk, and in many cases lost. And what we are having is a breakdown in every institutional system in the entire society. And that is not accidental, it's not inadvertent, it is not coincidental, it is calculated, planned, deliberate, and as somebody once said, I don't think either the Bloods or the Crips have the 747s that bring the coke in from Colombia. Now, who in the bloody hell is flying in the tons of cocaine, heroin, etc., to turn it over to the retail vendors? It ain't the people from the neighborhood where it is being sold. And in point of fact, if anybody was paying any attention, 3/4 of all the drugs consumed in the United States are consumed outside the ghetto. There are more drugs in the West Hills than there are in North East
Point that
Portland.
we need to ask
They
is
can
who
afford
is
them.
buying
But
this
the
stuff?
difference is, if you are middle class and you're able to do it with finesse, it's cool. It's just like murder. You know, if you commit a murder with a pen, you're a pillar of the community. If you do it yourself, you go to the slam. Now, I mean, we're going to have to grow up and take all this stuff and start paying real attention, because the history of this is not new. I mean, there have been exposés of this, you know, starting at least with the politics of heroin in Southeast Asia, which came out 19 years ago.
Being republished.
And being republished in an updated version. And 19 years that's been available. I mean, the book by Hank Messick on grass and snow came out in 1979. That's 12 years ago. He predicted absolutely what has happened since then. Now, why in the bloody hell do people in the Justice Department, the FBI, the CIA, the DIA, etc., ad nauseum, ad infinitum, pretend like they don't know what's going on? Because, in fact, that is what they have to do. They have to pretend like they just fell off the turnip truck and discovered drugs, and by golly, we're going to go out and fight them.
Because if they acknowledge it, then by default we acknowledge it, and if we acknowledge it, they have to deal with it.
And what's even more important, they're running both sides. Just exactly what happened in Prohibition, which is what Messick was explaining. He said Prohibition corrupted the judicial process, the legal process, the police system. Every part of the society was corrupted because of the massive amount of money that was made through this illicit commerce in material that everybody was going to have or else. And the fact is that the fat cats still drank the same bonded bourbon during Prohibition that they had before it was imposed. There was no difference. It just cost them more to get it. And the money that was made corrupted every police department, every DA's office, governor's mansions, state courts, federal courts. I mean, this country was corrupt to the core behind that. And oddly enough, Hank Messick, who was sort of the dean of crime journalists, was smart enough to go 2 + 2 = 4, you dummies. We're going to do it again, only this time it's going to even be worse because the amount of money involved is 100 times or 1,000 times what it was with Prohibition. And he said, we're going to run both sides of this program. We're going to make money off the war against drugs, and the government is going to make money off the drugs because it's the government that's going to end up running the drugs.
How did it get repealed?
Pardon?
How did it get repealed?
Well, because in fact, you can only, milk the system for so long before it starts to run dry. So, in fact, they legalized booze precisely because what they were going to do then, there were too much competition. So what they did is they eliminated the competition by making it quote-unquote legal under government regulation. And in fact, Joe Kennedy knew about the repeal of Prohibition because, in fact, one of FDR's son, I think it was Franklin Roosevelt, went with him to Scotland to buy all of the Scottish whiskey a year before the repeal. So he had it all on contract before the repeal, before anybody else knew it was going to be repealed. And in fact, he had it in the United States, in warehouses, under federal stickers when Prohibition ended. Now, that's how the winners play the game. I'm sick and tired of studying losers. And I'm a great devotee of studying history, and in the case of John Brown, I don't think he was a loser. I think he set in motion precisely what it was that he intended, and the only thing that I think sums it up is what he himself, the last thing he wrote before he was hanged. He says, I think I may have vainly flattered myself that with but a little shedding of blood, the sins of this guilty land might be washed away. And the fact is, that was true. Because we saw a war in this country that appalled the European military officials who were here to observe it. They had never seen such bloodshed in all of the history of warfare, in living memory. And in fact, it established a whole new concept of war, which was total war. Sherman's march through the South established exactly the paradigm that was followed by Adolf Hitler in the Blitzkrieg campaign, where you take it or you destroy it in a total swath.
How many miles wide was that column?
I think it was 30 miles wide. And there was absolutely nothing left in that entire strip. It was like, army ants had gone through and cleaned it. I mean, every railroad rail, they took the ties, put them up, put the rails over the ties, torched it off, and then took the rails and bent them around the tree. In fact, they were called Sherman neckties. They burned every standing structure, every structure. In fact, did people see the Civil War history that was on PBS? They had a real good segment on that where, in fact, because that was when photography started. We actually had photographs from that period. You know, and here were like whole rows of chimneys standing up with no houses. I mean, he destroyed everything. Cattle, chickens. I mean, if they didn't use it themselves, take it with them, they killed it, they burnt it, they destroyed it, period. And let's face it, it worked. But only temporarily and only tactically, because Reconstruction turned almost 180 degrees. And essentially we reestablished the power of the elite in the South. No. There was a period of radical Reconstruction, absolutely, but it went down, and I think the assassination of Lincoln had more than a little bit to do with it. I think, in fact, that there was a conspiracy behind the assassination of Lincoln that we have not cleared up yet to this day.
Well, he's still
Pardon?
He's the election 1876, Hayes Tilden sellout, where federal troops were withdrawn, allowing the Klan and the white power structure to terrorize.
Well, fundamentally, behind the whole damn Civil War, because Jefferson Davis, in fact, agreed to abolish slavery in his appeal to Great Britain to support the Confederacy as an independent state. So, I mean, slavery as an official legal category was going to be abolished, win, lose, or draw, and in fact, it would have gone under anyway. What was really at issue was whether or not the Southern plantation owners were going to pay their bills to Wall Street, because they were in hock up to here. And they decided, well, let's say, when we had the revolution against Great Britain, we welched on our debts, and we seized we expropriated millions of acres of land from people who held patent from the king, which, of course, suddenly became, you know, a plug nickel. So, I mean, behind an awful lot of fancy rhetoric, there's an awful lot of real, serious, grubby economic interests. And it would be awfully nice if we got grown up to the point where we could acknowledge that and deal with it on a rational level instead of always sort of running around like the Vestal Virgin pretending that somebody like G. Washington, in fact, was in it on the basis of his inspiration from God. I mean, it's a very naive way to view it. In addition to which, I'd like to see people understand that there is hardly anybody, either living or dead, who didn't have both their strengths and their weaknesses, and to try and see people as a totality and say that, you know, Jefferson did some good things, did some bad things, the same with Washington, and start seeing people in less than these kind of two-dimensional plaster saint or sinner modalities where you get, you know, your 3-minute hate or your 3-minute love, and that's the end of your depth of historical appreciation. But, you know, what the hell, I've always been an idealist. I mean, I'd like, in fact, people to have enough time to read, not to mention skill. But when you're set up in a situation where most of the people are living hand to mouth, who has time to read?
But no, but the schools would present
The schools are designed to make people dumb.
That doesn't work. They put out so many confusing information. It's like one person tells you this is what to read, another, and all the same subject, that now there isn't. How, I don't know, I'm only 23, but I'm sorry, I can't read all these books you talk about. And
So you read the
Not
summations.
You know?
between now and the next seminar, however.
You know, it's like, ever, like all of them, thousands of them.
Oh, you'd be
You can
amazed
read.
how much you can read if you get started.
You could read a hell of a lot and a half.
Well, but the thing is, you
Read
can
all there is
also
to know.
you can also read the more important books first instead of spending 25 years sorting through piles of dog manure.
Well, see, that's the problem. The sorting through dog manure. That's the challenge.
This book, which is the biography of John Brown by W.E.B. Du Bois, is one of the really important books that you want to understand right now, precisely because are you not hearing exactly the same debate today between the people who say, well, we have to do it non-violently, or we are in fact going to contaminate and or destroy precisely the objective that we seek to achieve. Well, I mean, that is a historical, classical frame of reference which needs to be looked at and given serious attention. It's not irrelevant, it's not trivial. It is important and needs to be given, careful and reasonable thought. But there is in fact another frame of reference, which was that, well, we agree on the objective, and therefore it is a question of what is it going to be necessary to do to achieve the objective, rather than simply foreclosing certain means because in fact they're quote-unquote inconsistent with the objective. And so, I mean, it's a historical paradox, dilemma, and issue. And if you're going to understand the present, it's kind of nice to go back and run through the program as it was run in the past, because you might learn something and not have to go out and reinvent the wheel. Maybe it's already there.
I was watching Nightline about a week ago, and
Is that the Ollie North?
Yeah. What was that all about? Because I went into it halfway through, and I don't know how.
Well, all it was a surreptitious tape made of the meeting by Ollie North and McFarland and the other, NSC bozos with the Iranians in Tehran when they delivered the autographed Bible and the chocolate layer cake designed like a key, and I was surprised there weren't a few glass beads thrown in. I mean, I don't know. They might have thought they were there flying Manhattan or something. I don't know. I mean, if I'd been the Iranians, I would have been terribly insulted. They probably were, actually. But anyway, what it was really excerpts from an obviously much longer tape, where in fact it was edited, massively. And what I'm really curious about is what the hell were in the outtakes. I mean, because there was nothing that was broadcast that was of any particular interest, other than the fact that it was, quote unquote, the voice of dear old Ollie playing his game of I am James Bond. I mean, you are aware that he's a Pentecostalist who speaks in tongues.
No. Really?
Oh yeah, man, he is not tightly wrapped.
Jesus came out of the Lighthouse Ranch, which is where Ephraim Rios Montt came out of. And Lon says he's a Christian, but he's more an authoritarian cultist than a Christian. And then there's a reporter, who went in to see Ollie North in church and found him bellowing like a demon, right there in church, whatever. It's just interesting to see. I don't know. There's not really very much real Christianity in the United States anymore. And a lot of the stuff that's called Christianity in the United States is really influenced by authoritarian.
Go past the rhetoric, the titles, the symbols, and cut to the chase. Now, what are these people really doing? What are the real effects of the policy? When you look at the real effects, you can tell what the real purpose is. And that's what people have got. They've got to stop being waltzed, by these BS artists and say, now wait a minute, I see so many people, do these non-denial denials. Bush is a master of a non-denial denial. Somebody asks him a question and he seems to have denied what was implied in the question, but he really doesn't. Basically he just kind of, veers off and skates on some tangent. And the reporters who have the, the bloodhound instinct of a congested rat terrier, let's face it. They're trying to follow the trail, but they got this sinus problem, and no Dristan, and they're rat terriers to begin with no nose, even without the sinus problem.
Bush is not as good as Reagan was. I mean, Bush just gets a vibe from the media.
He has intention.
But Bush gets a vibe from the media.
Actually, I think they're both very competent in their own unique style.
And wait for Quail, you'll have all sorts of new, unique things to experience. It is going to be an opportunity to. Gary Trudeau is going to have a terrible time.
I mean, how is he going to spend 4 years with nothing but a white feather? Now, does everybody know what the white feather means?
White feather is what they used to give people who didn't go for the draft or who didn't go to the front.
Well, it goes back to Rudyard Kipling. And the white feather was the sign of cowardice.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Now, if you understand, if you've read your Kipling, then you know what the white feather signifies. Now, it's very important for people to have this kind of literary and cultural history. If you don't know what the hell a white feather means, you know, you are missing the whole point. I know, but you shouldn't have had to have been told. Now you can tell other people, spread the word. Then everybody will know what the white feather means. And they might even go read some Kipling, which wouldn't be bad for them.
Or the best of Doonesbury.
Is that ours?
Yeah, Doonesbury's good too. Let's face it, I get real, I mean, if I miss Doonesbury and Outland, I feel terribly deprived because that's the only news in the paper. I'm not joking.
But what can you think in a society where a few years ago, I mean, it was like people would be embarrassed to say they're majoring in liberal arts, for heaven's sakes. That was like a no-no for how long? It isn't
Try a philosophy major.
still, you know.
What are you going to do with a philosophy major? Oh, think a lot.
Not even paying for a philosophy major these days. Thank you. Try paying for one. Thank you. Let alone getting it.
I couldn't afford to pay for it now. You know, I mean, literally. I mean, I have friends who have their parents, or in this case, the friends are the parents, actually, took a second mortgage on the house to pay the tuition. Now, well,
my sister took a BA in philosophy at Johns Hopkins with the understanding that it's a great introduction to law, to a law degree, or that they really look at it very kindly in law school. And she got to read all these summations that other people wrote of other people's philosophy. I don't think she read anything out of the Cliff Notes in all 4 years.
That's actually fairly standard. But, you know, there's some really wonderful books in the field. I mean, if you want the best single survey of Western philosophy, it's Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy. And don't skip the introduction, because the introduction, in fact, gives you the frame of reference for the whole thing. And one of the things he said in there that was really critical, he said that in the modern world, the best purpose philosophy can serve is to allow people to live with ambiguity and uncertainty without being paralyzed by indecision. And that was written about 1950. And that is more true now than it was then, because ambiguity and uncertainty are almost a steady state phenomenon. I mean, what's really going on with the Thomas hearings, what's really going on with the Gregg hearings, what's really going on, I mean, hell, we don't know. You know, at best, we're engaging in educated guesswork. So we have all this ambiguity and uncertainty. I mean, there are questions like, who is the Trojan horse in the October surprise? Is it Snepp? Is it Brennecke? Is it Russbacher? Is it Martin? Is it Honegger? You know, and the answer is, who knows? I don't. You know, I've got information, you know, also unclassified has apparently a new article on the Snepp piece against Brennecke, which I haven't seen yet. And I've got some information from Barbara Honegger. I've got to get back to her and get some more. But there is real reason at this point to suspect that Snepp is still working for the agency, and I've got that from 2 different sources. And in fact, he is on a $50,000 retainer for Rubino and May, who are the attorneys for General Noriega. Now, he's taken a $50,000 retainer as an investigator for the Noriega defense team, while in fact he is quote-unquote a journalist for the Village Voice. And in fact, the Village Voice editor on political affairs was asked about this by another researcher down in Miami, because he called, you know, the Village Voice and said, hey, you know, isn't this a conflict of interest? you know, that he is in fact on the payroll, while he is on the payroll of Village Voice as a journalist. Except that he will not release even a Xerox of any of the documentation to Barbara Honor or any other researcher. And there is no way to authenticate anything that he has in that article, precisely because he will not release any of the quote-unquote evidence upon which the article is based. Since you brought him, you get to take it. This is the set of cards for the drug war playing cards. Drug wars, opium and empire, #1 killer drug, America's drug of choice, the French Connection, etc., etc. There are a few factual errors, and it's pumpkin time. Let's wrap it up. Right? Because I got to go to work in the morning. Can't stay up all night like I used to.
Hey, Bert had Russell was fired by New York.